Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. I moved to South Korea for university when I turned 18. I'm now 21, and this happened over 2 years ago. While there has definitely been unwanted attention from some guys in the past, most of them get the message that I'm not interested. This, however, was a little more unsettling. The university I go to has an institute for language, which is where all of my classes were at the time. It's pretty common knowledge that most foreigners in this part of Korea would know of or study at this institute. It's not unusual for me to receive random Facebook requests from guys wanting to learn English or make foreign friends, and most of the time I just ignore them unless we have a few mutual friends or I've met them before. I got a friend request from this guy named Nico, and we had quite a handful of mutual friends. He'd messaged me too, saying he was sorry for the randomness of the request, but he was just trying to make as many foreign friends as he could. I thought, what the heck, and I accepted and messaged him back, saying it was no bother. From what I could tell by his Facebook photos, he was heavily pierced and tattooed and claimed he was Japanese, had studied in Canada, and could speak good English. He was also a foreigner studying at my university. After a few days, he messaged me again, and I replied. It was casual conversation, and he would often bring up maybe meeting for coffee or a movie, which I declined until he started getting more aggressive for no reason. Every time I'd make a comment, he'd find some way to turn it into an argument, which grew tiring super fast, so I just ignored him. He'd often ask if I had a boyfriend, to which I'd reply no. Then he bluntly said that we should be together. At this point, I decided that I didn't really want anything to do with him, so I politely declined on the basis that I didn't know him, we'd never met, and we hadn't even known each other a week. He didn't take my refusal well and began throwing insults at me based on my looks, saying overly graphic things that he'd do to me if he ever saw me because, in his words, I'd never do better than him and he'd make me see that. It creeped me out beyond belief, so I just blocked and deleted him on Facebook and tried to forget about it. I mentioned it to a friend of mine, and she immediately knew exactly who I was talking about. Apparently, I was not the first girl he had added on Facebook and tried to bully into meeting him and being his girlfriend. After asking a few more of my friends who we'd had as mutual friends on Facebook, they all described pretty similar situations involving this Nico. One girl even told me that she'd given him the benefit of the doubt and met with him, and it turned out that he didn't even go to our university but actually lived over an hour away. He would travel there daily, probably to watch and obsess over which girl he would find on Facebook next. He had told her he was born in America and had never been to Japan, yet he told me he was Japanese and had studied in Canada, so who knows how much of what he said to anyone was actually true. I felt a bit freaked out by this, but tried not to let it bother me. I'd never seen him around, and I'd blocked him, so I forgot about it. It wasn't until about a week or two later that I received a message from him on Facebook from another account saying he'd seen me that day at school. This shook me up a bit since I hadn't even considered that he might actually be watching me at school. I ignored the message and blocked the account. A few days later, I got numerous messages from different accounts claiming to be Nico's friends, saying that his account was hacked and could I please unblock him so he could explain and we could talk it over. I ignored these messages too, but I kept receiving more, all of which I am pretty sure were just Nico himself trying to reach out to me to get my attention. The more I ignored him, the more violent and aggressive the messages became, and I could tell that most of the time when he said he'd seen me, he was lying. He'd say things like, I saw you today at the library all day, you fing slut. You're a fing four-eyed slut who can't get laid, and other messages to that extent. I knew he was clutching at straws, because I never used the school's library to study, and although I wear glasses, I never wear them in public. So I just kept blocking the accounts and tried not to let it bother me, figuring he was just some desperate idiot. I assumed he'd get bored of me soon enough and let it go. Until one day after classes had finished, I was browsing the small convenience store in the building to grab a drink on my way home. I opened up the fridge to get a bottle of water, and when I closed the door, he was literally standing right beside me. He didn't say anything, he was just staring at me. I hadn't seen him in person before, because I had never agreed to meet him, but I knew straight away it was him. And I freaked out. I dropped the bottle and just left the store. I didn't walk home because I was afraid he'd follow me and find out where I lived, so I just went back into school and stayed around areas where there were lots of people until a friend of mine came to meet me. After that, I saw him a handful of times when I'd leave class. He'd just be standing there, doing nothing in particular, watching people as they walked past, and he'd stare at me intently. I made sure to always be with friends when I went to and from class, and didn't go anywhere alone for a while. But after a week or so, the messages stopped, and I didn't see him again. The last time I heard from him was a year ago when he messaged me on yet another new Facebook account, asking if we could be friends again because he'd changed and it was all just a joke. Needless to say, I ignored the message, blocked the account, and will not be taking up his offer on being friends. I dated my last serious boyfriend for around 6 years, and throughout those 6 years, I always received pokes from a guy on Facebook. I didn't think too much of it, and since we had about 30 friends in common, I figured maybe I had met him somewhere along the way. Besides, he was muscular and quite attractive, so having the additional attention was fun, I guess. A couple of weeks after my ex and I split, he private messaged me, asking if we could chat. We talked for a while, and I eventually agreed to go out for a meal with him. For a first date, it was a pretty lovely one, a nice meal, a walk under the stars, all that. After a few weeks of seeing him, though, I noticed some strange traits in his behavior. He would never let me into his house and would leave me standing outside. One day, I stood outside his house for 45 minutes at 10:30 p.m. after we had walked there. I didn't know where I was, and he decided I had given him the hump for no apparent reason. This is where I should have bailed out. The following Friday, I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt and invited him over. He stayed for 9 days. I had to text a friend, asking her to pick me up and not invite him, just to get him out. I figured I'd leave it there, but he turned up on my doorstep the next day. I told him I wasn't feeling well and that I had a pretty serious urinary tract infection, which was met with accusations of cheating and even being a slag. This was the final straw. I told him to leave and not to bother contacting me again. After that, I received text after text, missed call after missed call. I blocked him on Facebook, so he messaged all of my friends, begging them to convince me to take him back. No chance. I figured he would back away eventually. Things went quiet for about a week, and it was bliss, until I received a call from an unknown number. The caller asked me who the man was that had just walked in front of my door. It was my father, by the way. This happened every time someone walked in front of my flat, male, female, it didn't matter. It turned out he knew someone who lived across the street from me, and had both him and his girlfriend watching my every move. Things calmed down again after I spoke to the couple and explained the grief this was causing me. He had told them that he was still with me and that he was concerned for my safety. I thought he had finally gotten the message, but one day, after finishing work, I caught the bus home. I had this perfectly timed so that I would always be pulling up to my estate at 6 p.m. As I strolled down the hill to my estate, ready to cut through the alley towards the garages, I noticed a figure tucked away in the shadows. It was him. I kept my head up and walked steadily to my front door. He followed at a distance until I reached the door, then ran after me and chased me up the stairs in the block of flats where I lived. I told him I wasn't interested, that he was scaring me, and that he needed help. There was no way I would change my mind in this situation. After one of my neighbors let out a massive scream, he was escorted out of the building and was warned that if he returned, it would probably be the last thing he ever did. At least now I've learned not to date people off of Facebook and to at least run a background check on any future partners. I'm a 22-year-old female, finishing up my first college degree this summer. I take mainly online classes since I work and volunteer a lot. However, this semester I only had 2 science classes left to graduate, and one of the classes I needed was only offered on campus. Ugh. It's a twice-a-week class, and each session runs roughly 2 hours, but the teacher usually lets us go after about 45 to 60 minutes. I live quite far from campus, so I usually arrive about 50 minutes late and therefore never get called for attendance. The teacher knows my situation, and I just have to let him know I was there before I leave class, and we're good. I know this may not seem important, but I promise it is. So, my class has a test coming up next week. The teacher provides study guides that are pretty similar to the actual test questions, but they aren't required to pass or anything. A lot of it is common sense. Today, I was hanging out at my coworker's house when my phone went off. I checked it and saw a Facebook message from a person I didn't recognize. I opened the message, and the name wasn't one I had ever heard or remembered hearing. It's a pretty unique name, so I was a bit confused. The message read, "Hey, I'm in your intro to science class. I really need a study guide and would drive to your house if it meant accessing it." Immediately, I felt a little weirded out because I literally had no idea who this guy was. I didn't recognize him from class, and I certainly didn't recognize his name. Not to mention, as I said earlier, I'm never there for attendance, so it couldn't be easily explained like he saw me answer to my name or anything. Then I thought maybe he looked at the class roster online and messaged a bunch of people. So, I texted a few of my classmates to see if they'd heard from this guy, and they all said no and asked why I wanted to know. I explained the situation to them, and they confirmed they didn't recognize his name or face. These are good students who actually show up to class on time. So, I didn't message the guy back, obviously. Then, he messaged me again a few hours later saying, "Come on, I know you read this." Now I'm even more creeped out. The teacher has been offering the study guide in class for about 2 weeks, so I really don't understand why he wouldn't have a copy. Not to mention, he could have contacted the teacher for a copy, as we still have several days until the test. If he did look up the roster online, why would he have only messaged me and not my other classmates? Maybe I'm overreacting, but I feel like it's super creepy. I'm a 20-something American woman, a Francophile, and fluent, though not native, in French. Since 2011, I've been in correspondence with an eccentric French guy I met after he posted a clip of a rare telefilm on YouTube. We shared a bunch of mutual interests and eventually met in person so he could give me the movie on a flash drive. He also gifted me a book from his personal library, one he thought I'd like. We stayed in contact, and I recently returned the favor by buying him a DVD off Amazon. It's been good, our conversations are enriching, and he's a sweet guy, just a bit odd, as am I. He sort of switches between identities online. His real name is Jean with an Italian surname, but he also uses the name of a fictional character from Gothic literature. He's very into dark romanticism. I first knew him on Facebook under the character's name, which he also used as his email address for a while. Last summer, however, he began using an email address based on his real name, so it became a mix of the two. He tends to disappear from Facebook without warning and then reappear just as suddenly. He's gone through 2 or 3 different accounts, all using the fictional character's name. So, it wasn't a surprise when he vanished sometime last fall. I just kept an eye out for him. Occasionally, I'd search for him, and one day, I found an account with his real name, though not one with the fictional character's name. There was no profile picture, but that was typical. Since he sometimes uses his real name online, I added the person, figuring that if it wasn't him, he'd decline my request or message me to ask how we knew each other. When he accepted without question, I assumed it was him. I started messaging him in late February. Between then and now, we've exchanged over 900 messages. I picked up where we'd left off, saying how it was good to see him back, that I'd just been thinking of him, and that I'd planned to email him something but could now just send it via Facebook chat. He greeted me warmly, and when I sent him a YouTube video I thought he'd like, he discussed it with me. He was a little less articulate than I remembered, though not enough for it to stand out, except in hindsight. I think his incoherence wasn't as obvious to me in French, since it's not my native language. Jean is eccentric, but that was normal. In April, he returned to Facebook under the fictional character's name. We added each other and started chatting. I would message both accounts indiscriminately, they were never online at the same time, so I'd just talk to whichever one was active. Over time, I noticed that things felt off with the real name Jean. He'd say things that didn't make sense and then refuse to clarify. He'd use flirtatious terms that made me uncomfortable, and his frequent typos made it hard to follow his messages. But I only realized later that all the oddities, the typos, cryptic statements, non sequiturs, and flirtation, happened when I talked to real name Jean, not the fictional character account. All the friendlier, more coherent conversations happened with the fictional character Jean, like when I got his address to send him the DVD. He was simply nicer on that account too. At the time, though, I didn't notice this difference, because the two accounts seemed to have a continuity. We discussed similar topics on both, and while the speech patterns were somewhat different, more lucid and friendly on the fictional character account, there were notable similarities. They used the same Italian expressions, like a flirtatious phrase that made me a bit uncomfortable. Once, fictional character Jean jokingly called Roberto Alagna Bel Oyamo while making fun of an album cover. Both accounts also used the expression no problemo and complained about the French far right. It seemed seamless, until it wasn't. On Saturday, I saw real name Jean online and started chatting with him, asking if he'd heard about recent events in the US. When I brought up marriage equality, he responded with homophobic slurs, which shocked me, as I'd known him to be decent. We'd debated non-binary gender before, but this kind of hostility was new. As we argued, he became paranoid, saying things like, "Hide with your friends so as not to show your face at the supermarket," and told me to stop talking to him. His hostility confused me, given our 4-year history and past affectionate behavior. Trying to understand, I asked, "So, we're not friends anymore?" He responded that friendship means nothing on the internet, which felt bizarre since we'd met in real life in 2011 and had been planning to meet again last year, except he'd been out of town. Later, I noticed fictional character Jean had liked and commented on one of my photos. It hit me then, all the likes and comments had been from fictional character Jean, not real name Jean. I went to Facebook chat, but only real name Jean was online. I asked him why he'd liked my posts after telling me to stop talking to him. He insisted he hadn't liked anything and asked, "Where do you see my name?" I replied, "Well, not your real name, fictional character Jean." He simply said, "So," and told me to leave him alone. By this point, I was reeling. Was he having a dissociative episode? I resolved to talk to fictional character Jean when he came online and confront him about the behavior on his other account. He logged on early the next morning, and I immediately messaged him, unsettled but curious. "Hi, can I talk to you?" "It's kind of urgent," I said. He replied, "Urgent?" "Sure, what's up?" I asked, "When I was talking to real name Jean, you're the only one I'm talking to, right?" "This man is you," and I linked to the Facebook profile. He replied, "Actually, I don't have a Facebook account under my real name. This person is just a namesake." He confirmed he'd only been back on Facebook since April when the fictional character account reappeared. He seemed distressed to learn I'd been talking to this person for 4 months, believing it was him, and even more distressed that I'd thought, even briefly, that he was the hostile, homophobic person I'd encountered. You might be wondering how it took me so long to figure this out. All I can say is that I'd taken for granted that real name Jean and fictional character Jean were the same person. It didn't even occur to me that they might not be. I assumed them being the same person was the baseline, and the idea that real name Jean might be pretending, or that he wasn't my friend at all, was so far-fetched it never crossed my mind. Even when he gave hints, he wasn't the right person. I simply assumed he was my friend. When I mentioned specific things that must have made no sense to him, he just went along with it. The idea that he was faking it, lying, or was simply delusional seemed too strange to consider. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.